and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah, delighted as always to be with you for the first of 2 episodes this week. Should be another one on Friday if everything goes well. Hope you are doing well. We have a great interview for you today. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as I always do, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. Also, if you want to help out the podcast and the entire network in another way, you can do so by going to gsmcpodcast.info, and there you can leave a tip or a donation. That really helps, as I said, not just this podcast, but the entire network. It is greatly appreciated. All of your support is always appreciated, no matter what form that support comes in. I am grateful for all of my listeners. I'm grateful for everything that you do to support me and this podcast. Again, you're going to see that link, gsmcpodcast.info, not only in the video next to me now, but also scrolling along the bottom throughout the episode. So if you want to, like I said, go there and leave a tip or a donation. You can also leave a question or a comment. Happy to engage with those next episode after I receive them. So ask away and I will answer them. I hope you are having a great week so far. Hope you had a good weekend. We, as you know, are, potty training a puppy. He is 11 weeks old today. Wow. I just realized that today he's 11 weeks old. So he is doing pretty well, considering that he's only known us a couple of weeks. But yeah, he's teething, and he's got the tiniest little needle sharp teeth. That is a challenge, and no matter how much I try to redirect him to his appropriate teething toys or toys in general, he really thinks it's much more fun to chew on things that he should not chew on, of course, right? Because he's a puppy and we are potty training. He's really good about letting me know when he has to go when he's in his crate, which I appreciate. He does not go in his crate. He's less good about letting me know when he's out and about in the house. Like last night when I was folding laundry and he jumped up onto the clean laundry that I was in the process of folding and peed on it. He had just been outside. He had just gone to the bathroom less than 5 minutes before. But did that stop him from going on my clean laundry? No, it did not. Did I threaten to put him up for adoption? Well, I mean, yeah, I did. But did he believe me, and was I serious? No, of course not. But I was like, seriously, dude, not cool. Not cool. So yeah, you're going to have a lot of pup dates, if you will, puppy updates as we go through this. And it's a good thing that he's adorable and snuggly and sweet, and he makes me laugh, and he has the cutest little hops, and he is a fierce leaf hunter. Like, you should see him subdue leaves outside. He's very good at it. Older dog he's a grumpy old man. He just looks at this energetic, hyper 3-pound puppy like, seriously, dude, go away, you bother me. But he is doing much better. He is more energetic. He is more active. He is not just lying on our bed being sad. So grateful for that. And yeah, that's pretty much what our lives consist of right now is puppy. So thanks for, it used to be, used to get the horse updates. We have not been down to see the horse in a while. I need to go see him. So now you get puppy updates, and hopefully you're okay with that. But first puppy, then books. I have a returning guest joining me today. David Ellis was first on the podcast a little over 2 years ago, December of 2022. He was here to talk about his novel, Look Closer. Today he is here to talk about, obviously, the new novel that is next week's. He is here. I just gave you a sneak peek at the next interview. No, David Ellis is here to talk about The Best Lies. Let me go ahead and give you a description of the book. Leo Balanoff is a diagnosed pathological liar with unthinkable skeletons in his family's closet. He's also a crusading attorney who seeks justice at all cost. When a ruthless drug dealer is found dead and Leo's fingerprints show up on the murder weapon, no one believes a word he says. But he might be the FBI's only shot at taking down the dealer's brutal syndicate. Risk his life going undercover for the feds or head straight to prison for murder. Leo accepts the FBI's offer, but it comes with a price, including a collision course with his ex, Andi Piotrowski, a former cop and the one who got away, Forced to walk a tightrope between an ambitious FBI agent and a cruel, calculating crime boss, Leo's trapped in a corner, but he has more secrets than anyone realizes, and a few more cards left to play. So again, that is the description of The Best Lies. Again, author is David Ellis, and it's interesting to have a main character who is a pathological liar. We're going to talk about that a little bit in the interview. I like David's books because they're always very twisty, and some things you might see coming, some things you might absolutely not see coming, but they're always going to go in directions that they're not just straightforward. There's going to be twists, there's going to be turns. They've always got some very interesting, very human, very complicated characters. You're not going to get one-dimensional characters, and they're engaging, they're fast-paced, and if you like crime fiction, then you definitely should check out his books, this one included. But let's go ahead and let David talk about the book so you can hear more about it, learn more about it, see if it's something that you want to put on your TBR. Again, the book is called The Best Lies. The author is David Ellis. Hi, David, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me again.
It's nice to have you. It's been 2 years since you were on the podcast to talk about your other novel. We're going to talk about The Best Lies today, but before we do that, if you wouldn't mind reintroducing yourself to people who maybe already heard the first interview and introducing yourself for people who are new.
Yeah, hi. I'm Dave Ellis. I live in Chicago. I've been writing books since really the turn of the century. Well, in the late 90s, I started writing my own books. I have written about 12 of my own books. I've written about 12 with James Patterson. I'm happy to talk about that. And I'm a judge. I've been a judge on the Court of Appeals in Illinois for 10 years. So I've been a lawyer for 30. I've been a judge for 10.
Yeah, thank you. And
Yeah,
you said turn of the century, and my brain took a moment to be
I
like,
know.
wait, what? Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
I know
Uh,
it's a thing, right? It makes you feel old when you say that. I've been
yes.
writing for over 25 years. Let's put it.
I don't know if that makes either of us feel either any better, but
No.
it's a good number. Good for you. So the new novel is called The Best Lies. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yeah, so what I've learned about myself is I'm at my best. I tell the best stories when I start with a really interesting character. And then I think, what do I want this character to be? And then I ask myself the question, why is this person so interesting? What happened to him in his life that made him this way? And that usually ends up turning into the plot. And in this case, the main character in this book is a guy named Leo. He has two kind of central traits. One is he is a pathological liar. I thought it'd be interesting to write a book about a pathological liar. And the second trait is he is a crusading attorney who that he can be his own worst enemy. He will basically, when he sees an injustice in the law, he will stop at nothing to fix it, often at great, great personal cost to himself. So, as the book opens up, we learn, I'm not spoiling anything, we learn immediately that he's a pathological liar and that he is charged with the murder of a very, very bad person.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what is it like to write a main character, a protagonist, that you want people to kind of root for him and his cause, but he is a pathological liar. So there's some moral gray areas in there. Is that a challenge? Is that a good challenge, a challenging challenge? How does that work for you?
Yeah, a lot of times in this genre, we write about unreliable narrators and protagonists, and I thought this might be the ultimate one. And so, yeah, there's a lot of first person narration. There's multiple points of view, but he's the principal one. And yeah, I think it keeps the reader on their toes. I think Leo is a good person. I think people will think that about him, but he's obviously got some interesting character flaws. And, the reasons why, by the way, he's a pathological liar is a very interesting element in the book. And again, forms part of his background and part of the plot. So,
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of fun spending time with him. I had a blast writing him.
And it is from multiple points of view, but Leo is the only one that we get from the first person. So
That's right.
we aren't ever sure if we're getting that reliable narration because it's from Leo's point of view, or it's Leo speaking in the first person.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Are there any other of those points of view that you want to talk about in terms of characters?
So another one of the main points, there's three POVs. Another point of view is a woman named Andrea, who is a former police officer who now works as in security for a big pharmaceutical company. And she knows Leo. They have a past together, a romantic past. It's in the past, the romance, not the present. And there is ultimately a plot afoot, which again is not really a spoiler. It comes fairly early in the book, to steal from this pharmaceutical company the formula to a very valuable patented product. So she obviously ends up interacting with Leo again, and that's not very welcome to her. She was a really fun character to write about for me. She's biracial, and she grew up on the south side of Chicago. And I went to law school in Chicago in the 90s with a biracial woman who I became pretty good friends with, who told me what it's like growing up on the south side of Chicago when you're biracial. And I didn't want the whole book to be about that, and it's not, but it formed an interesting part of her character because she sometimes felt very isolated as a child. She felt like she was rejected by all sides. She was not black enough for black people. She was, and to white people, she was a black person. And she never felt like she had a community.
Mhm.
And she said that it could be exceptionally lonely. And the reason I ended up using this, which is something my friend had told me about, is that's a good basis, a good foundation for Andi, because Andi is very much alone in this world right now, and that was essential to her character, that she'd spent a lot of time being alone. And so it kind of worked. She and Leo actually are kind of an interesting pair. In some ways, they're two very jagged pieces that maybe fit each other.
Yeah. Yeah, Andy is an interesting character, and it doesn't help that her in her parentage, her father is white and Polish, so she's got a very Polish last name, which
Yeah, yeah,
in addition to having to explain everything else, she has to explain why she has a Polish last name to people who, I don't know, just don't think past the surface.
yeah, that's right. No, and she kind of makes fun of it. She's gotten used to it,
Yeah.
but I thought that would be an interesting other aspect is, I mean, people will see her, meet her, they'll hear her last name is Piotrowski, and they'll say, "Oh, is your dad Polish? Is your mom Polish?" And she's like, "Well, of course,"
Right.
but
Right.
get over it. But that's our world, and so yeah, she's got a lot of demons in her closet, and she's pretty troubled. And but I think ultimately she may have been my favorite character. She's a very brave and strong character. But as we go through the book, this is a book about, deception and, and suspense and, what role she plays is actually, is she a hero? Is she an anti-hero? That's something you have to decide as the book goes on. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fun to watch them play off each other.
I have to say, I did really enjoy Andy as a character, and I understand why Leo is the main point of view. The protagonist is told from in first person, but I'm very glad that Andy was in this. I appreciated having her perspective. I really liked her as a character. I liked the way she and Leo played off of each other. So, in terms of multiple points of view, I was very glad. I think it might have been harder to just have one point of view, to just have Leo's point of view, because he is such an unreliable narrator at times. Like, he's a guy that you root for. Like, he takes on causes, and you want him to succeed in what he's trying to do, but at the same time you're kind of like, you're a little questionable sometimes. So I'm not saying that Andy is perfect, and I'm not saying that she, makes choices that always made me go, yeah, I completely agree with that. But I did like that there were other perspectives, and that Andy's perspective was one of them. So we are going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, more on those multiple points of view. We'll be talking about Chris, who is the third point of view in the novel. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author David Ellis. As we get into segment 2, I do want to remind you once more and your final time that you can go to gsmcpodcast.info to support the podcast in a monetary fashion. You can leave a tip or a donation. If you would like, you can also leave a question or a comment. This is just another way to support not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. Again, that is gsmcpodcast.info. Before the break, we were talking about this book being from multiple points of view. In fact, 3 points of view. David had already talked about Andi and Leo, who are 2 of those points of view, and now we will get to the third. So back to that conversation with Leo.
And the third point of view is an FBI agent who's investigating this this plot to steal the pharmaceutical formula. And so the way these, it's in some ways it's easier to have multiple points of view as the writer because you can bring in more perspectives, you can bring in more facts just from a practical standpoint. But you also have to be careful, Sarah, because, as I'm sure you know, because if you have too many points of view, the reader loses their intimacy with the characters. So I thought 3 was the right place to stop it. I thought about a 4th character. I actually dropped her. The FBI agent's sister is in the book a little bit. I had her as a POV, but I thought that's probably too much for the reader. And really, this book is about Leo and Andi, and so I wanted to make sure I gave them enough airtime.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that you like to start with an interesting character, which in this case was Leo and his pathological lying. But how about some of the other plot elements? What was your jumping off point for, the investigation? And I mean, there's several different things happening here. So what was your initial jumping off point?
Well, I've always been interested in the idea of an undercover FBI operation where the person who's at the center of it, the undercover operative, is just a normal everyday person, right? They're not a police officer, not an FBI agent, but they're a person who's been forced into that role. And that's what quickly happens to Leo in this book. Yeah. And then I thought, what if he's a guy who doesn't always want to play ball? Because undercover FBI operations are a bit of an honor system and they operate a lot on trust, and there's a lot of danger and there's a lot of cloak and dagger and murkiness. And what if you've got an unreliable, or in this case, a pathological liar for an undercover FBI operative? The sky's sort of the limit. And so in the back of my mind, Sarah, for a long time, I'd thought about incorporating that idea into a book, and it just made sense with Leo. But really, a lot of the plot comes from going into Leo's background, which you learn as the book goes on. Yeah. I just find that my characters end up being the kind that their lives become part of the plot, and that seems to work for me. I thought it worked pretty well here, and there's a lot of things that are going to happen that I don't think the reader's going to see coming.
Which is a very good point. When there's a lot of twists and turns, people are constantly doing things that you go, wait, maybe you had an inkling, or maybe you had no clue it was coming. But so for you as the author, how do you keep everything straight? Do you know where you want to get in the end and you're working toward it? Do you have everything mapped out?
Well, it's funny. When I used to write these, when I was younger, I treated a book like a case I worked on as a lawyer. And when you're trying a case as a lawyer, you start with the end. You start with saying, what do I want to say in my closing argument to the jury? What facts do I want to be able to tell them that will help win the case? And then you work backwards through the preparation of the case and then during the trial to make sure all those facts get into evidence and are shown to the jury. And so you know the ending first and you work back. And I used to do that. I used to think of a surprise ending and then I'd work back from that. I don't do that anymore.
Mm.
Um, it's probably the influence of James Patterson a little bit, more than a little bit. But it's much more important to me that the reader is enjoying the ride along the way. And so what I've been trying to do is to pack a bunch of surprises throughout. I kind of analogize it to watching a season of a show that you really like. And at the end of every episode, 1 hour or 50-minute or 45-minute episode, there's a big moment, right? There's a revelation, there's some twist or some turn that makes you say, "Oh, I can't wait to keep going. I'm going to watch the next one." I found, probably because I'm such a fan of that formula, that that's what I write now. Call it 10,000 words, every, I don't know, 10 or 12 chapters, I try to put a pretty healthy twist in to make you say, "Oh, wow." And I work really hard on making sure that the ride is fun. It's a much more pragmatic way of looking at all this through the viewpoint of the reader and thinking, what does the reader want? And if you have nothing but not nothing, but if your only big hook is a big surprise at the end, that's
Mm.
great. But if you think about the shows or the books that you've enjoyed the most, whether they're critically acclaimed or not, who cares? But the ones you like the most, I think most people would say, I loved the ride. I enjoyed it
Mhm.
from start to finish. And so I'm focusing, and that's what Patterson keeps saying. There should never be a dull moment. People should be constantly enjoying what they're reading. No slow parts. And so that's what I try to do now. I try to make the whole book fun. Like every 10 chapters, like, oh, this is really cool. I didn't see that coming. And then, of course, yes, you want to have a surprise at the end, which I think I did. I did. And I hope that's great too. How do I keep it together? I don't know everything when I start, Sarah, because that was your original question, right?
Yeah.
I actually did know the final surprise because it's
Okay.
something I've always had in my head, um, as something that could happen and really could happen. And so I just made it happen in the book, dealing with science and forensics, just kind of a flaw in the system and a pretty obvious one if you think about it. But, as I went along, I change my mind when I write. I'll be writing the book and I'll say, "Oh, wait, something will come to me. Wouldn't it be cool if this were true instead of that?" And so there's this organic nature to the storytelling for me. I can't think of every twist at the beginning. I would
Hmm.
love to have that talent. I would love to be able to do that. I try to do that when I plot out the books, but usually I come to the conclusion that I just can't think of them all until I've started writing, until I've started living their lives, and until it's all starting to play out in real life, sort of, so to speak, as I'm writing. I can't just conceptually in my brain come up with 8 twists for a book
Right.
before I begin. So it's sort of it makes for slower writing, right? Because you could come up with a really cool idea for a twist on, chapter, I don't know, 42, page 260 in the book. And you may have to change everything that came before page 260 to make that twist work. It's not a very efficient way to write.
Yeah.
So I wish I could think of everything, but it just doesn't happen for me that way. So it means it takes me longer to write.
Sure. Yeah. You mentioned, chapters. Your chapters tend to be on the shorter side.
Yeah.
Have you always written that way, or is that part of the kind of keeping things moving?
Yeah, I have not always written that way. And that's also probably the Patterson influence. Patterson always has instructions to his co-writers that the chapters have to be a very short length. 1,200 words is what he says. And when I first heard that, I wasn't really sure why he did that, but now I understand. Readers want it forces the author to take whatever information and really pack a punch with it, not waste time. You don't need 3 paragraphs on the color of the couch in the room. You can give it some reference. It's the color of coffee with cream or something.
Hmm.
And there given it a little bit of life, but I don't need to spend 3 paragraphs telling you about it. It makes you be more succinct, and I think it's keeping with what readers want now. It keeps the pace, like you said, very, very fast. It keeps it very tight. And so I think it makes my writing stronger and it makes the reading experience much more enjoyable. I like that personally. I like short chapters.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, it's much nicer when you are like me and you have to read before you sleep and you're just going to read a
yeah.
chapter. It's much easier to read a chapter, or you can read multiple chapters at that point. Um,
Well, that's right. And you know that as the reader, you know that each chapter is going to be maybe 3 or 4 pages. And so maybe I'll read one more chapter.
yeah,
If you know you've got 14 pages, it might be time to go to bed. It
yeah,
does make people read the book faster. And I'm glad you brought that up because I think that, and I think every reader would agree with me, maybe not, the less sessions of reading you have, the more you read in one spot, the better the experience. I mean,
mhm,
ideally, there's probably very few people can read a novel of this length in one sitting, but if you did, that would be ideal. I know
yeah,
you can't do that, but
right.
if you could, that would be ideal. And if you're going to read one chapter a day and it's going to take you, 45 days to finish it, are you going to enjoy it as much as if you read, multiple chapters a day and finished it in 20 days? I think you're going to enjoy it more if you've read it in a more compressed time. It's going to stay fresher with you. That's my
Yeah.
theory.
You probably noticed when we went into that segment or into that section of the interview that I said we were going to talk to Leo, not David. You know, I caught it that time. I wonder how many times I mention the character instead of the author and I don't catch it. You would probably know better than I would if you've been watching or listening to the podcast for any length of time. So, anyway, but David, the author, David was just talking about the fast paced nature of the book and what do you prefer? Do you like books that are faster paced? Do you like quick books, shorter chapters, things that you can just kind of speed through? Do you like books that you can sink into and that take a lot of time? I mean, everyone's different, so I'm curious what you think. Let me know what your preference is. Think about it as we go to break because we're about to take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we're going to be circling back to something that David just said and talking about long descriptions of items or scenes. You're tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with David Ellis. Before the break, we were just talking about books and how they offer escapism, whether, that's a quick read or a long, lengthy read, and everyone is different on that. But let's go ahead and return to that conversation. We're picking up kind of in the middle. I'm going to refer back to, he was just talking about a long description of, I think he said a couch. So let's go back to the conversation with David. Back, and this is similar, but back to your point about not describing a couch in multiple paragraphs. I laugh because I always think of my husband who was listening to an audiobook. It was a fantasy book, which they can sometimes be a little wordier, but this one was to the point where he was commuting and he was an hour into his commute listening to his audiobook, and they still hadn't stopped describing this woman's dress.
Yeah.
He was like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care.
You don't care. I mean, you gotta, nobody knows exactly where to draw this line, Sarah. I'm sure you know this too, but um, you want the reader's imagination to take over, like every reader will imagine certain things a little differently. That's okay. That's great, actually. If they're doing their own imagining, I think that that's helpful. But you try to put them in the scene a little bit. So you do little things without overdoing it. That really, except in very rare cases where like the layout of the room is critical to the story. If it
Yeah.
is, fine, then you're going to have to spend a little bit of time on it. And the reader will probably pick up on the fact that you're spending a little more time on it and say, oh, this must be important. But if you do that all the time, I just, there's setting the scene and then there's boring the reader. And when you bore the reader, when the reader gets impatient, when your husband is driving in the car and he's hearing this and he's getting a little like, okay, enough already.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's come out of the story and
Yep.
he's thinking, would you quit describing the dress to me? I don't care.
Yeah.
He's completely, it's like the old-fashioned way of describing it would be the needle coming off the album, right? The screech.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be like you've now I'm trying to immerse you in a story, so you're like, okay, I'm with you, I'm following you, I'm part of this story, and I'm seeing the characters. And now I've come out of it and said, would you just quit talking about the dress?
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to avoid that. If I'm doing my job right, you kind of forget that somebody wrote this and toiled over it, and you're just getting engrossed in the story. If I do some of these other things, I pull you out of the story, and that's a fail.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. You're thinking about I'm thinking about not the story. I'm thinking about you as the author. Why did you keep writing this? Where is your editor? Did they not
Yeah.
say this is way too much? Where are your, beta readers? What have you? My brain is going in 10 different
Yeah.
directions, not on your story.
Yeah, you're thinking about the author and not the story. They should never be thinking about the author.
Yep, exactly. Um, I would imagine some research that had to happen for this story because there's research in the book for one thing, but
Yeah.
anything in particular stand out for you for research?
Well, look, I mean, there's some forensic things dealing with, for example, DNA. There's some human trafficking in the book, and being a judge, having been a lawyer, I know a fair amount about that topic. And I should say to readers, it's not what the book is about. It's not in your face because that's a tough topic, right? Which is a
Yeah,
which is a tough decision for me as the author to make. Am I willing to talk about something that's hard? And I chose not to put it in the reader's face. It's referenced, it's a back part of the story. You don't actually see it.
yeah,
Not really. But yeah, like I wanted to make sure I was getting that stuff right. And so yes, there was some research and I could draw on my own personal knowledge. I try never to take anything straight from a case I worked on
sure.
because I just don't want to do that. I'll get ideas from cases. Once in a
Hmm.
while I'll see something really cool and say, I should use that thing in a book. Like I'll give you an example. There was recently I had a case where they were trying to figure out the time of death of somebody, and they found a coupon from a newspaper in his back pocket. I think
Hmm.
it was a I think it was a man. I think the victim was a male. And they were trying to figure out when was that coupon put in the newspaper. And this unfortunately was years ago. So
Right.
it wasn't like they could just look, and they had to go back and say, when was this shoe store putting this advertisement in? And the store is
Interesting.
out of business. And I thought you could play with that, right? You
Yeah.
could kill somebody and slip something in their back pocket that would throw investigators off. Like that's the kind of stuff I'll see and I'll be like, oh, I could play with that. So I don't copy it verbatim, but I don't put it in the same set of facts, but I'll get little nuggets like that. But you got to be careful. I feel like I want to be careful not to write too closely to the cases I decide.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, do you ever just get sucked down research rabbit holes and find
All
you
the
have to,
time.
yeah.
All the time. All the time. In fact, I probably over research. And then you run into the problem of all this information and it's stuff that most people don't know and you want to share it with the reader.
Yeah.
And Patterson will tell you I'm guilty of this sometimes. He'll say, this is interesting information to tell the reader, but not this long. This is too much. If you can do it in a paragraph, maybe two paragraphs, I think the reader will be like, oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool, without spending like a whole chapter on it, which will drive people nuts.
Yeah.
And so it's called killing your babies, right? I'm sure you've heard the phrase, killing
Mhm.
your babies. You write something and it's really interesting stuff that you learned and you're proud that you learned it and you want to share it. But then you realize the reader will only be so interested in this and they'll be like, okay, enough already. And
Right.
of course, that's what you don't want. So there's so many little decisions that go into a book. That's the funny thing. Like every chapter has 5 or 6 strategic decisions in it. Do I talk about this? Do I do that? How do I approach this? And there's so much editing that goes on. Yeah, I usually over research and then decide how much I can share.
Yeah, I think that probably makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
because you've got to be able to speak about it even tangentially, you have to know more than you can put into that description.
yeah.
Yeah. What are you currently working on?
So, I'm working on a couple things. I'm working on something with Jim Patterson right now, which is the first time I've ever gone into historical fiction.
Hmm.
So it's based on the time right before Adolf Hitler got to power. And a lot of people think he committed a murder,
Oh.
a very scandalous murder, right before he became chancellor. And there were some good people trying to bring him to justice, but they were thwarted because by that time he was a pretty powerful guy already in Munich.
Hmm.
And he wasn't holding office yet, but the Nazis were starting to gain some real power, and he had a lot of people protecting him. And so we sort of tell that story a little differently. And what if, you
Yeah.
know? So that's been really interesting. Talk about over research. I mean, my God, there's so much research from that era.
Yeah.
In, in terms of my own book, I've told you now I like to start with a character, and so I was thinking, about a conflict between two characters, and I was talking to my wife in our kitchen while we were washing dishes after dinner, and our three children were running around and doing what they always do, which is mostly fight a lot with each other.
Yeah.
To the outside world, my three kids are wonderful. I don't think they have any conflicts. They've lots of good friends, but when they get together, it's like cats and dogs.
Yeah.
And I
They
said to my
they know how
wife,
to push each other's buttons. They're siblings.
"Oh my God, do they?" And so I said to my wife, Susan, what where could I come up with a situation where two very interesting people, are maybe they care about each other, but they're also at loggerheads? And she said siblings. And I thought, oh my God, 100%. It's like the sky opened when she said that to me, like a big light shone on my face from the sky. I said, you're completely right. And so this next book, I'm calling it Play Nice. And it's about adult siblings who there is a murder within their close-knit family, and they do some extremely interesting things to each other. Whether they're supporting each other or not is something that the reader will have to learn as the book goes on. But it's been fun to conceive. I'm at that stage, Sarah, where I don't know every twist yet. I've got a few of them, but not enough. And I'm trying to tell myself, okay, Dave, it's time to start writing it and not just, in your mind, try to come up with every conceivable twist. So I've written some of it, and my publisher's really excited about it. And I think it's going to be really fun.
So another question for you. Do you like books with lots of twists and turns, books that are more complicated, books that maybe take you by surprise? Do you like books that are more straightforward? Again, every reader's different, so let me know what kind of books you prefer. I am nosy and I like to know these things. We're going to take our next break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about we'll be continuing this conversation that we were just having about the twists and turns and the work in progress. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author David Ellis. Before the break, we were talking about his current work in progress and that it is full of twists and turns and maybe a little bit complicated. We're going to continue that conversation now. It sounds fun. Sounds like it could have a lot of twists and it could be very complicated.
Yeah, I like to write about it. Maybe it's maybe everybody's like this. I know true crime is really popular now, and I
Hmm.
think the reason people like true crime is because they see ordinary people doing unordinary things. And I used to use the word normal. I don't actually believe in normal. I don't think any of us really think of ourselves as normal, but conventional people, right? People who
Sure.
basically follow the rules. They send their kids to school, they go to a job, they pay their taxes. They basically follow the rules of society. But then some of those people will cross those outer boundaries, thou shall not kill, or, everybody sins, but most people don't sin that mortally. But some do. And I'm always interested in the sort of conventional person who does really something really crazy and then telling the
Hmm.
story of how that happened. That's what I like to do. Leo's a pretty conventional guy. Yes, he's a pathological liar, but he's a lawyer. He goes to work, and these characters in my next book are going to be the same way. I think that's really interesting to me. Like somebody who's, great at everything they do, who can like shoot anybody from a distance and always saves the good guy, or saves the damsel in distress, or that's not really that interesting to me. I like real people who have flaws because I think we can all relate to that and kind of get inside their skin. So,
Hmm. Oh, yeah, and I think it's always interesting when it's a quote unquote ordinary or normal or however you want to put that
yeah.
conventional person doing the unconventional or something a little out of bounds. The why, getting into
Yeah.
that story of why, what brought them to this point, because
Yeah.
you could have started at the same place as this person, but what choices?
Yeah, yeah. I think people find that interesting. I really do think that's why true crime is so interesting. So
Yeah.
I could never write a superhero. I could never write about someone who could fly, or and none of the. I like reading sometimes some paranormal stuff or some science fiction. I'm fine with it, but it just doesn't move me as a writer. I
Hmm.
like that ordinary person who does something unordinary, and people seem to be responding to it. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious when it comes to a co-authoring relationship like you have with James Patterson,
Yeah.
how does that work in terms of what you write together? Like, do you have a lot of say in that? Is it kind of an assignment? I'm not even sure how that would work.
So the way it begins is Jim has this incredible ability that I do not have to conceive of an entire story,
Hmm.
from beginning to end, but also the middle. And, he likes to call them scenes. He doesn't really think of them as chapters, but scenes, which brings a visual to mind, right? Like a scene in a movie. And he will outline every scene that he wants from beginning to end of the story. And he'll leave a few things out by design, knowing that I may need to fill it in. And what he'll do is he'll give me an outline, okay? And it will have maybe 3 or 4 sentences for each scene, each chapter. And there'll be some editorial direction. I want this to be a really scary moment. We want to like this character. I want there to be suspense about their relationship. Whatever editorial he may put in there, and then I'll write it. 4 or 5 chapters at a time. And so, well, first of all, we'll talk about the outline. He'll say, "What do you think?" And usually,
Hmm.
I said, Jim, I can't see that far down the road. I mean, you're pretty good at this. I usually just say, "Let's do it."
Hmm.
And sometimes things will change as they go on, and I'll talk to him about it, and I'll say, what might be cool is if we do this instead of that. As I've written the book, I was thinking this might be a cool switch, and he will typically say, give it a shot. Like he doesn't care if it's my idea. He has no pride of authorship for ideas. Like if all he cares about is will it be fresh and cool and interesting. And if so, he'll usually say, give it a shot and let's just keep an eye on it. If it's not working, maybe we'll go back to the outline. So sometimes we'll break off the outline because we'll come up with something. I'll still generally follow the outline, but I might change a thing or two. It's usually not that dramatic, but it's very important to him that it's fun for me, which I think
Hmm.
is really cool of him. Like he wants this to
Hmm.
be a fun experience for the co-author, which is crazy. He's super nice. He's really, he's very chill. Like he never yells. He would never yell. He's just not that way. But he's also very demanding. Like he knows what he wants. He knows what his readers are expecting. And so he'll call and he might begin a sentence when he calls me with, okay, chapter 4, Dave. I mean, this was really good writing. But, like he'll always start with the compliment because he's a nice
Hmm.
guy. but I thought it was too slow, or I'm not feeling it. This person does not scare me yet, or I thought this didn't seem realistic, whatever it may be. And he'll usually give me the chance to rewrite it and send it back to him. I analogize it to an actor performing a scene for the director. And the director can say, great, we're good, let's go to the next scene. Or the director will say, good job, but I need more emotion from you, or I need this or that. And why don't you do it again? So it'll be like that. And we'll kind of go through the book that way. He always reserves the right. I mean, he is the boss. He doesn't act like a boss. He acts like a partner. He's really nice about that, but he is the boss, right? And so sometimes he'll say, well, let me write this. I'm going to write this chapter. In fact, in the book we're doing about Hitler, he wrote a chapter. I tried it a couple times, and he said, let me take a shot. And I saw how he did it differently than me. And that was interesting. That's a learning lesson for me. The guy, it's like taking a master class every time I talk to the guy.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. Like half the time, and I've been doing this for a while, Sarah. I think by now, having written 25 of my own books, I would pretty much know everything that I need to know as a writer. And you would think, having written 12 books with Jim, I would know the things that he cares about. But nevertheless, on a constant basis, he will make comments about a book, about a chapter or something to me, and I will learn something. And sometimes I won't learn it until I do what he said to do. Sometimes he'll say things to me and I won't even totally understand what he means. I don't know why. I can just be dense, I guess. But I know that he knows what he's talking about, and I know it's good advice, so I do it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I knew what he meant. Yeah. So now I sort of just listen and take notes, and sometimes I don't even understand it until after I've done it. He's really masterful at knowing what his readers want, and it's very important to him that it's never about the author, it's about the reader's experience. I mean, there's a reason he's been so successful. People could stop reading his books and buying his books, and they don't. They keep buying them because he keeps his promise to them. And that's been a good lesson for me too, to think about, what are you expecting when you get a book like this? When you get The Best Lies or my last book, Look Closer, what are you expecting? You're expecting a fast, twisty thriller that's just going to be a lot of fun to read. Maybe we want to call it a beach read. Maybe it's a little deeper than a beach read, but I'll take beach read. I used to blanch at that. I used to say, oh God, my book's better than that. Well, why not a beach read? We live in a very serious world right now. If I can give you 10 hours of entertainment, if I can help you escape from the world and just really enjoy something, I should be proud to do that. And so I'm always thinking of the audience now. I probably had that hammered into me by Jim enough. What do you guys want? And am I delivering that to you?
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I know every co-authoring relationship is going to be different, but I was curious as to how that one works. I'm always interested in co-authoring relationships in general, and I don't know James Patterson, but I see James Patterson books with a million different co-authors. That's an exaggeration, but the man just seems like he never stops. So it's nice to know. I find these things interesting, fascinating even. So maybe you do as well. Hopefully you do. At any rate, we're going to take our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about what David has been reading. You're tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. Before the break, David was talking about co-authoring. I think he said he's done about 12 books with author James Patterson and how that relationship works and what he's learned from it. And it was all very fascinating. If you want my opinion, we are going to go back to that conversation, the conclusion of this conversation with David Ellis. Since I've spoken to you, well, maybe not last because that was 2 years ago, but more recently, what have you been reading?
So right now I'm reading Scott Turow's new book. It's called Presumed Guilty. So he's known for all of his books, but particularly he wrote Presumed Innocent, which is one of my Bibles in terms of just how to write a great suspense novel. Presumed Innocent was an amazing book. They just redid it on HBO, and now he's coming out with Presumed Guilty. And I'm actually going to host him at a book event in Wisconsin in about a month. He is amazing, and the guy, when you're a really good writer, actually forget writer, when you're a really good artist, you make it look effortless. And even though it's not effortless, it's the product of an extraordinary amount of effort, but you make it look easy. Like if you're a basketball fan, a whole generation of people grew up thinking that it was really easy to shoot a 20-foot jump shot because Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan was doing it. And they made it look like, oh, just throw it up there, it goes in. Well, of course, it's very hard to do that. But they made it look easy because they worked their butt off to get to that point. And if Yo-Yo Ma picks up a cello and starts playing, you think, oh, I should be able to do that too. Yeah. Well, of course you can't. He had to practice how many thousands of hours. Yeah. I'm sure Turow does the same thing with his books, but his books are so good that you forget that you're reading the work of, the toiling of some guy in front of a computer for hours on end. It's like butter. It's just so smoothly written that you just get engrossed in the story. That's what I try to do. I don't know if I succeed, but Scott succeeds in that way more than probably anybody I've ever read. So that's what I've been reading, and it's been great fun.
Yeah. Do you tend to? It's winter. It's Chicago. Yeah. Do you tend to read more in the winter, or not so much?
So here's my guilty secret. I don't read very much. It's probably because I've got 2 full-time jobs, really. I'm a judge from the time that my kids get up in the morning and it's time to get them off to school. My wife and I go to work, until dinner time. I'm a judge. And I only really write in, the time that I designate for myself to write is from 3:30 in the morning till 7 a.m. That 3.5 hours is when I write. That's when nobody's bothering me, nobody's awake, nobody needs me, and I can just have that time. If I can write at night, I try, but my kids are young enough that I'm still driving them places, and so is my wife. And on the weekends, if I can, I do. But I don't have that much time to read. And anytime I'm reading, I think to myself, you should be getting that next book out, especially because I'm writing my own book and I'm writing with Jim and I'm a judge. So when I have free time, honestly, Sarah, I'm more likely to pick up my phone and watch something.
Sure.
Because it just seems easier. Like I can just do 5 minutes or 12 minutes, or if I'm waiting for my daughter to come out of her piano recital, I'll put it on my phone for a few minutes. I miss that, and it's not good for me as a writer to not be reading much. I should be reading more. It's one of the most important things to do if you want to be a good writer is read good writers. And I'm not very much. And I'm trying to work on that, but there's only so many hours in the day,
Just gonna say, you're already awake from 3:30 to 7.
Yeah.
So absolutely. David, if people want to know more about you and your writing, I know you've got a website, so if you can share a website and any social media that you're active on.
Yeah, thank you. My website is just my name, davidellis.com. Instagram and Facebook is really where I do my work now. Instagram, I think, is David Ellis Author with little underscores between each word. And on Facebook, it's just author David Ellis. The one thing I will say, thanks for letting me, is I'm always happy to do book clubs with readers. It's on my website. You can go there and you can sign up. There's a whole section for book clubs, or you can just reach out to me however you can find me on Instagram or Facebook. Um, I'm willing to spend an hour with you virtually if you can get a group of people, and there's no minimum. I've done book clubs with 200 people, and I've done book clubs with 6 people. And I've done them all over the world. I did one from Karachi, Pakistan,
Oh, wow.
with a bunch of women, and for them it was their Saturday night at 8 p.m. and for me it was 8 a.m. Saturday morning. But that's okay. If I'm home, I'll jump on a Zoom call with you, and I feel like it's the least I can do to give back. I mean, we have to make the details work, but I can usually make it
Yeah.
work. And I do 2 or 3 book clubs virtually a week with people, and they seem to really enjoy it. And as you can see, I don't mind babbling. So we usually have a fun time.
Nice. Yeah, that's amazing. That I think that really became more prevalent during COVID, but it's something that
Yeah.
has been stuck around, and I know a lot of authors do that, and
Yeah.
I just think that's amazing because how often
It's
before
great.
that would you have an author actually be at your book club?
Right. And you
Probably
would have
never.
to, unless they were close enough to travel. And,
Yeah.
the bookstores and the bookstore signings are great when you can do them, but those are very, very scheduled. And, if you can do a Zoom from your home, it's just so much easier. So it's been
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Well, is there anything that we have not covered that you want to make sure you highlight during our time together?
I don't think so. I think I've babbled quite a bit, Sarah. Thanks for your patience.
Don't think you babbled at all. I think you did very well. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, and have me on anytime, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you again to David for joining me once again on the podcast, this time to talk about The Best Lies. If you are interested in the book that he mentioned, the one we talked about last time, Look Closer, you can find that episode December of 2022, whatever platform you're listening to on. I don't know how you search on whatever platform you're listening to on, but you can find it. At least you have a month and a date, so go look at that. If you are a fan of thrillers, of suspense, fast-paced, interesting, maybe not reliable narrators or protagonists, in this case Leo, but other characters and just really, really fast-paced, twisty, turny, good, complications, I guess. If you're a fan of this type of book, then definitely check out The Best Lies, but also David's other novels, because he has a bunch, and so you've got a good, if you haven't read him, then there's lots of books to read. I always love finding authors that have a few or a lot of books, and then I can just dive into them and start reading an author that I enjoy. So if you're a fan of this type of book, then definitely check out David's books, this one and his others. So thank you for David for joining me, and thank you as always for joining me. I hope that you will join me on the next episode, which should be out on Friday, but as I always say, like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening or watching this episode on, because then you'll be notified when there are new episodes. Should be Friday. We'll see how the week goes. That interview is on Thursday at any rate, but that interview is with Lauren Claudere. It's called Cover Stories, and I am really looking forward to talking to Lauren. This book is loosely based on some of her own experiences, and I'm interested to hear about the inspiration. I'm not going to give you too much information on this book, because you can look it up, but also come for that conversation, because I'm really interested in talking about Lauren. That one's going to be on YouTube, but audio only, because Lauren writes under a pen name, and so we will not be seeing her. So that's going to be interesting also, because of the nature of this book. She is working to keep her actual identity. She's not disclosing that. Sure, makes sense, and we'll find out more about that. But it's gonna be an interesting conversation, and I'm looking forward to speaking to Lauren. In the meantime, like I said, if you are a fan of the podcast, like, follow, subscribe, etc. Also, leaving a positive review really helps the algorithm, gets the podcast out to more listeners, more readers such as yourselves. Greatly appreciated all the support that you give. Also, you can follow the podcast on social media: Facebook, X, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok. as long as it's around, but follow the podcast and let me know what you're reading, ask any questions that you have, etc. I am going to let you get back to your day. I hope it's going well. I hope your week is going well. I'm going to go make some tea with lemon because I think I'm getting a cold and possibly losing my voice, which is nothing unusual for me, but I hope that your week is going well, whatever's going on in your life. Hopefully you're not getting a cold, but whatever else is going on in your life, I hope that you have plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you, and I will talk to you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to